Well, today we're talking about chapter 3 in the book, The Power of 7 Second Chances, and it's titled Leading Empathetically and Compassionately. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Welcome to you as well. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This chapter really is one in which we've anchored the work, right? Because I think repeatedly in the chapter, we talk about and utilize the three words: empathy, sympathy, and compassion. And one common sort of misconception in conversations about empathy, compassion, and leadership is it relates to this idea of using sympathy. Should leaders be sympathetic in the work that they're doing versus being empathetic? And which one tends to have more of a positive outcome for an interaction between a leader and an employee who's deserving of either one of those two pieces?
Yeah, what I've gotten myself in trouble with sometimes is that I have given the perception that sympathy is not ever warranted in working situations. However, there are times when I am ill, when my parents have passed away, when I have huge emergencies that require me to go home, take care of myself, come back to work when I'm fit for service. For those situations, we tend to have employee resource groups available to folks. We have policies, procedures through our HR practices to solve for those. However, in our working environment, when we're talking about objectives that need to be met, accountabilities that we have to each other, stretch goals, challenging circumstances, in those situations, sympathy is detrimental to the way we lead. And empathy, or being understanding, knowing that I hear you as my direct report, that I have some experience with what you're going to be dealing with, that I'm here to support you, and then I'm motivated to help you. That's far more effective in driving outcomes and also making people happier in their work environment.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that I heard you mention two of what we often call the 4 Ps. You mentioned policy, and you mentioned procedures. The other 2 Ps that I want us to be thoughtful about, and maybe we can delve a little bit deeper into this. So policies, you mentioned procedures. Oftentimes, what about productivity, right? We often look at, even when an employee or a co-worker is underperforming, we often think about what is the policy to evaluate them? What procedures should I follow? And are they working in such a way where productivity is being maximized, but we often forget the 4th P, and that is the person, the people. And so how do we make sure that we are utilizing an empathetic approach and not minimizing the importance of the people?
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that we understand the difference between running our operations and inspiring and motivating and helping our people rise to levels of astonishing greatness. And so when I'm talking about policies and procedures, that's usually around operationally how we run our business, and things related to the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, the time that I need to be offered. Those are operationally how we run our business. And people are not processes. We can't approach them like processes. We can't, we can, but if we look at people like processes, we'll find that people fall outside what we consider our standards. And people will astonish us with their ability to achieve if we take an empathetic approach versus a sympathetic approach as it relates to productivity and the people who are delivering on that productivity. Because sometimes we think that it's the process that helps us get there, but if we don't have people, how do you get those numbers? How do you get them?
One of the things that I found recently, as recent as last week, is there are colleagues, there are individuals who work in organizations, particularly in education, that are so reluctant and resistant to embrace an empathetic and compassionate approach because their belief is that the system of evaluation, the system of following the policy and the processes and procedures is exactly where they need to go. And what was ironic to me, and this was a moment of reflection, is as I watched one leader who has been sort of vehemently opposed to lead him with empathy and compassion, been faced with a situation whereby she was on the verge of being disciplined because she had exhausted, and if I may, her 7-second chances at doing what is right. And so, ironically, this leader said to the individuals who were there to evaluate her or have the discipline meeting with her, she said, all I'm asking for, and this is a direct quote, is just for a little grace and mercy. And so it made me think about the fact that it's an observation that I've made. Oftentimes, most people who are resistant to an empathetic and compassionate leadership approach only pivot towards empathy and compassion when they're in a situation where they're asking for grace. I wonder, why is that? What causes people to only pivot towards empathy and compassion as leaders when they're personally affected?
One of my favorite mentors, Dr. Irma Williams, says, you're going to learn pleasantly or painfully. And sometimes we have to learn painfully. Yeah. We have to experience it. And what I am inviting leaders to do is before you have to learn it because you needed it, yes, to learn it in advance of that situation. And I had to learn an empathetic and compassionate approach after the death of my mother. So I had to experience what it looked like to need a little grace, to have someone look at me and say, you know what, I believe in your capabilities and your ability to get this work done, in spite of what else you might have going on at the time. But it wasn't until I needed to be viewed in a more humanistic, through a humanistic lens, did I start to stop seeing people as cogs in the wheel, yes, and actually see people as people. And so, you know what, sometimes we have to experience it. But what I love about what we are putting in front of people is just simply this. If you can change, if you can get the work done, mm-hmm, through powerful, pushing, stringent methods, mm-hmm, black and white, following the rules and policy, wonderful. But what if you can get the work done and not lean on compliance, but have people working because they want to give discretionary effort, because they want to follow you? Either way, the work gets done. And absolutely. So what is the issue with allowing people to get the work done and have a celebratory spirit while doing so? And we talked about this last time. People see either empathy and compassion or work gets done. And I'm saying empathy and compassion and work gets done together. It's not either or.
Absolutely. And we've seen examples, right, especially in contemporary American society, or just worldwide, and it transcends any one professional arena. I remember watching an interview with General Colin Powell, one of my favorite sort of military leaders of our time. And a reporter asked him, she said, General, can you tell me, how do you know when you have a leader who people have a tremendous amount of trust in? And he said, I'm glad you asked the question, because trust is probably one of the most important attributes of a leader. And he said, here's how you know when you have the kind of sort of leadership acumen where people trust you. You know that if people want to follow you wherever you go, even if it's just out of curiosity. And it was powerful to me because he went further along by saying, unpacking that statement by saying, if as a leader, if you are hungry, your troops should never know that you're hungry. You want to make sure that they're taken care of first and they're fed. And metaphorically speaking, the feeding that he was speaking about was not necessarily just to satisfy one's appetite, was feeding them intellectually, feeding them in terms of their being mission focused. And so he was getting at this place to say, I want to make sure that I'm always in a place where I'm understanding what my direct reports need, what they're thinking, how they're feeling. So I want to empathize with them. You see, he did not say he wanted to sympathize with them, wanted to understand what they were feeling, what they were thinking, and how he can exemplify leadership is wanting to empathize with them. And we talk a lot about in this book, The Power of 7-Second Chances. You can certainly, as a leader, exude sympathy as well as empathy, but you do not want to focus a lot on sympathy without being empathetic. Here's the question that I want to ask you as I think about that. What happens when a leader looks at the work that we've given to them, looks at the presentations, and realize that it's powerful, it's value added. But eventually, having exercised empathetic leadership day in and day out for a long period of time, they're certainly getting to this place of exhaustion. What should happen? What should a leader do? How can they sort of make sure that they're recovering and reigniting themselves?
Yeah. Well, one thing is for sure, we need to be aware that compassion fatigue is real. So this notion of servant leadership, which Greenleaf introduced to the world, as I put myself out there to put everyone else first. So you think about service organizations, hospitals, schools are service organizations,
Sure.
police officers. As I'm out there in the world worrying and being concerned about other people's needs before my own, sometimes we make the mistake of not caring for ourselves. And when we do that, we'll start to see in our leadership ranks, infighting will go up, trust goes down. We might start to see absenteeism as people aren't caring for themselves. And so another thing that leaders need to be aware, cognizant of is, one, just be aware that compassion fatigue is a thing so that you can start to recognize when your leaders are getting a little bit tired. Two, make time to celebrate the successes, because, along this journey, and that's one of your 7 strategies that you've introduced to me, along this journey, it's like reading a novel, a really big one. And I can look forward and see, gosh, I still have 200 pages to go. I'll lose sight of the fact that I've already come 100 pages.
Yes.
And so we have to keep track of where baseline was so that we can see that we are making progress, so it doesn't feel like it's a futile effort. Mm-hmm. Those 2 things, if people just did those 2 things, mm-hmm. they would really be helpful towards eliminating the effects of compassion fatigue.
Absolutely. As we wrap up, I think oftentimes traumatic or dramatic events in our lives, personally and professionally, I think often pushes us towards this philosophy that you and I have been so passionately sharing. That is, these events can cause us to become more empathetic and compassionate. And I saw a great display of that today. In wake of what is happening in our country in Houston, Texas, right? And we send our prayers out to those individuals. The superintendent of one of the public schools in the Midwest, St. Louis Public Schools, Dr. Kelvin Adams, who originally moved here from New Orleans. And he mentioned today, as he was briefing his executive leadership team, he directed them to be ready to open up the doors of their schools to receive every single student, who knocks on their doors. He said, regardless of what that student is dealing with, regardless of what they're going through, they do not even need to have documentation. We will get to that later on. If they knock on your doors because they're coming from Houston, I want you to take them in, because I understand what it means to have to deal with this, because I was a part of Katrina. So that empathy, right, that personal experience-based empathy was powerful for me. Can you, as we wrap up tonight's session, can you tell the listeners and our audience all over the world, reflect on one experience, either personal or professional, where you had to pivot towards an empathetic approach? And what was that?
This one is really hard for me to talk about publicly, because it still in some ways is a source of embarrassment, but it has helped me be a better leader.
Sure.
At one point in my professional career, I had a series of people in my support network, and I was on top of the world from my view. I was considered high performing. Every time there was a new opportunity at work, someone tugged on my coattail first to say, we want to make sure that Nicole is there, getting this exposure, representing our organization. I'm not exactly sure how it happened. I haven't spent a lot of time evaluating it, but I looked up one day and my support network was pretty empty, and I was on a performance improvement plan. Mm-hmm. My work hadn't changed. However, the view of my work had changed dramatically. All of a sudden, I was a terrible project manager. I didn't surprise and delight my leadership. The work that I was delivering wasn't the work that the organization necessarily valued, according to this leader. And so today, what that experience helps me at a visceral level understand what it looks like when what's being asked of you is unclear, what you're experiencing every day is not necessarily what your leader is experiencing. How do you help somebody develop in areas where they have natural talent and ability, so that we can overlook some of their gaps and things, ways that God just didn't design you to be. And so now when someone comes to me and they're like, hey, listen, this person is not performing in this area, in this area, in this area, I start asking questions about passion, about purpose, about prowess, about desire, strength. And is there some place else we can put this person? Is this a matter of favoritism? Is it just that the leader has changed and so now there's something about that person's approach that's just rubbing you the wrong way? Is this not about the work at all? And so I'm now more open to Margaret Heffernan's request for all of us to get rid of super chickens and look at every single person on our team as a valuable member of our organization. And the point at which we can't look at a person that way anymore, we have to do them a great service and ourselves and find them something else to do.
Absolutely.
But writing people up no longer is my first thought.
Sure.
And I'm not sure that I ever would have gotten there if it hadn't been my experience.
Right. So I think sort of experience-based empathy, right? And
Experience-based empathy.
I love it. Very, very powerful, very, very strong. And so just in closing, it really reminds me of the fact that the conversation that I alluded to earlier, where this particular leader who clearly has had some shortcomings, but when you observe her in her daily interaction with subordinates, there was no empathy or compassion. It was strictly compliance driven and was always about process, procedures, and policy and productivity, never with a lot of care for people. So today, two messages I'm hoping that our leaders around the country and our listeners in general will take away from us. One, be cognizant of compassion fatigue and empathy fatigue. It's very, very possible. And so make sure you're pacing yourself. And two, please, 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 it's important that you not prioritize policies, processes, and procedures over people. Empathy and compassion is a way for us to pivot, and if you want to get the best out of our people. Nicole, as always, it's great talking with you. We're looking forward again to connecting and sharing with the world another chapter sometime next week. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Take care.